Welcome to the Daily Bite. I'm your host, Pastor Steve Andrews. We continue the study of the book of Jeremiah with chapter 25. The word that came to Jeremiah concerning all the people of Judah in the 4th year of Jehoiakim the son of Josiah, king of Judah. That was the 1st year of Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon, which Jeremiah the prophet spoke to all the people of Judah and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem. For 23 years, from the 13th year of Josiah the son of Ammon, king of Judah, to this day, the word of Yahweh has come to me, and I have spoken persistently to you, but you have not listened. You have neither listened nor inclined your ears to hear, although Yahweh persistently sent to you all his servants the prophets, saying, Turn now, every one of you, from his evil way and his evil deeds, and dwell upon the land that Yahweh has given to you and your fathers from of old, and forever. Do not go after other gods to serve and worship them, or provoke me to anger with the work of your hands. Then I will do you no harm. Yet you have not listened to me, declares Yahweh, that you might provoke me to anger with the work of your hands to your own harm. Therefore thus says Yahweh of hosts, because you have not obeyed my words, behold, I will send for all the tribes of the north, declares Yahweh, and for Nebuchadnezzar the king of Babylon, my servant. And I will bring them against this land and its inhabitants, and against all these surrounding nations. I will devote them to destruction and make them a horror, a hissing, and an everlasting desolation. Moreover, I will banish from them the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voice of the bridegroom and the voice of the bride, the grinding of the millstones and the light of the lamp. This whole land shall become a ruin and a waste, and these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. Then, after 70 years are completed, I will punish the king of Babylon and that nation, the land of the Chaldeans, for their iniquity, declares Yahweh, making the land an everlasting waste. I will bring upon that land all the words that I have uttered against it, everything written in this book, which Jeremiah prophesied against all the nations. For many nations and great kings shall make slaves even of them, and I will recompense them according to their deeds and the work of their hands. Thus Yahweh the God of Israel said to me, Take from my hand this cup of the wine of wrath, and make all the nations to whom I send you drink it. They shall drink and stagger and be crazed because of the sword that I am sending among them. So I took the cup from Yahweh's hand, and made all the nations to whom Yahweh sent me drink it. Jerusalem and the cities of Judah, its kings and officials, to make them a desolation and a waste, a hissing and a cursing, as at this day. Pharaoh king of Egypt, his servants, his officials, all his people, and all the mixed tribes among them, all the kings of the land of Uz, and all the kings of the land of the Philistines, Ashkelon, Gaza, Ekron, and the remnant of Ashdod, Edom, Moab, and the sons of Ammon, all the kings of Tyre, all the kings of Sidon, and the kings of the coastland across the sea, Dedan, Tema, Buz, all who cut the corners of their hair, all the kings of Arabia and all the kings of the mixed tribes who dwell in the desert, all the kings of Zimri, all the kings of Elam, all the kings of Media, all the kings of the north, far and near, one after another, and all the kingdoms of the world that are on the face of the earth. And after them the king of Babylon shall drink. Then you shall say to them, Thus says Yahweh of hosts, the God of Israel, Drink, be drunk, and vomit, fall, and rise no more, because of the sword that I am sending among you. And if they refuse to accept the cup from your hand to drink, then you shall say to them, Thus says Yahweh of hosts, You must drink, for behold, I begin to work disaster at the city that is called by my name. And shall you go unpunished? You shall not go unpunished, for I am summoning a sword against all the inhabitants of the earth, declares Yahweh of hosts. You therefore shall prophesy against them all these words, and say to them, Yahweh will roar from on high, and from his holy habitation utter his voice. He will roar mightily against his fold, and shout, like those who tread grapes, against all the inhabitants of the earth. The clamor will resound to the ends of the earth, for Yahweh has an indictment against the nations. He is entering into judgment with all flesh, and the wicked he will put to the sword, declares Yahweh. Thus says Yahweh of hosts, Behold, disaster is going forth from nation to nation, and a great tempest is stirring from the farthest parts of the earth. And those pierced by Yahweh on that day shall extend from one end of the earth to the other. They shall not be lamented, or gathered, or buried. They shall be dung on the surface of the ground. Wail, you shepherds, and cry out, and roll in ashes, you lords of the flock. For the days of your slaughter and dispersion have come, and you shall fall like a choice vessel. No refuge will remain for the shepherds, nor escape for the lords of the flock. A voice, the cry of the shepherds, and the wail of the lords of the flock. For Yahweh is laying waste their pasture, and the peaceful folds are devastated because of the fierce anger of Yahweh. Like a lion he has left his lair, for their land has become a waste because of the sword of the oppressor, and because of his fierce anger. This is the word of the Lord. Really, the primary theme of today's chapter is going to be the idea of the role of government and how the Lord works through government to bring about his judgment, which ultimately means the chapter is about God's judgment. We're going to start, though, at the start of it. Chapter 25 begins with the idea that God's people have gone into this exile, and it puts some times around things for us. So we've got the 4th year of Jehoiakim is when Jeremiah is going to receive this word from Yahweh. That puts it around 605 or 604 BC. That would agree with records and history of Nebuchadnezzar's reign over Babylon. For 23 years, so if you go backwards from 605 or 604, you would get 628 or 627. I suggested back in chapter 1's study that 628 is a good date for the start of this book and the call of Jeremiah to serve as prophet. For 23 years, Jeremiah has spoken the word of Yahweh persistently, consistently to Yahweh's people, and they have not listened. A good starting point for family conversation. Can you imagine saying the same thing to someone day after day for 23 years and they don't listen? They still won't hear it. They still won't hear the word of the Lord. Now, some of you might be able to say that you've had a job like that 23 years of fruitless labor, it seems to have meant nothing. Some of you might even have a relationship like that, where you have been trying to convince your spouse, or you've been trying to convince a grown child, or you've been trying to convince, whoever it is, a friend or family member, and they just won't listen no matter how much you tell them. In that case, you've got a bit of a glimpse of what Jeremiah has gone through here. He has been speaking to them consistently this whole time. Yahweh has continued to reach out to them, inviting them to repent. That's verse 5. Turn now, every one of you, from his evil way. And if they did, dwell in the land that Yahweh has given to you and to your fathers. That was the promised land, that they would get to dwell there forever. Yet you have not listened to me, declares Yahweh. Instead, they've provoked God to anger because of the works of their own hand that have now done them harm. So their hands have done terrible things, and now the Lord repays the work of their hands, and it's harm for them. This is not good. So Yahweh declares, because you have not obeyed my words, verse 8, I will send for all the tribes of the north, for Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, my servant. I will bring them against this land and its inhabitants, and against all surrounding nations. Romans chapter 13 is a parallel text that is worth looking at least the first 5 or 6 verses of that chapter, where we learn in the verse 1 that every governing authority in this world comes from God. And in verse 2, if you resist them, you're resisting God, which is not good. We also learn in that text that the Lord has given governing authorities the power of the sword. That is the power to bring judgment, God's judgment in this world. Now, they don't always do so rightly, and that's going to be part of the point coming up later. But at the moment, in the meantime, for now, the initial point is God has summoned Nebuchadnezzar. God has called upon Nebuchadnezzar to bring his judgment against his own people, against Judah. So when Nebuchadnezzar comes, whether he realizes he is a tool or not, he is the Lord's tool bringing about judgment in this world. The Lord is using him as such. He is using the Babylonian army. He's using the world's superpower, their greatest might at the time, in order to do this thing. It is not unearned. They have rebelled against God. All those surrounding nations, which will also come up later here in the text. So Yahweh has devoted them to destruction, an everlasting desolation. He's going to banish from them, and we've seen this phrase. So the voice of mirth, gladness, bridegroom, bride. This fourfold phrase of voices back in chapter 7, verse 34, again in chapter 16, verse 9, and it will appear once more in chapter 33, verse 11, about a week from now. Joy, celebration, even the gift of life. When you think of groom and bride, without grooms and brides, you no longer have children. God is going to wipe them out. He's removing this from them. He is bringing his judgment against them. Then you have the grinding of millstones, which is the production of food, and the light of the lamp, which is seeking to be able to see even in the darkness and continue on their evil deeds even more than the light has given. This whole land, not just Judah, but these surrounding nations also, this whole land shall become a ruin. These nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. Now that is going to date from the destruction of the temple, 587 BC, and it will go until really the rededication of the temple. So God's house, the place where he would speak, the place where he is king and dwells in the midst of his people. When it's destroyed, the clock starts, 587 BC. When it's rededicated is roughly when that clock comes to its conclusion. And the dates on that one vary a little bit. I've seen the 517. I tend to see 515 as a year for that. So you can still get to 70 if it's right at the beginning of 515 and it was right at the end of 587. That it would be not quite 71 years. It would be just over 70 years in that kind of a time frame. So the king of Babylon is going to do this. He's going to judge these other nations. The Lord will use him in such a way. However, as I mentioned with the power of the sword, those who abuse the power of the sword will also have to face God's judgment. Well, in fairness, everyone faces God's judgment. Those who abuse the power of the sword will have to give an account for themselves before the Lord of how they abused that sword. And that's what's going to then happen here. Babylon is also judged. So the other nations are judged first. He uses Babylon to do it. But then because Babylon itself is a wicked and evil nation, the Lord does not spare them, but judges them also. This is the kind of picture that it is helpful to talk about with our children. And really the question becomes, is it any different today? And the answer to that's no. The Lord still works in this world, and the Lord still uses one evil nation to topple another evil nation. He does this, and then again, everyone will have to give an account before the Lord. Every governing authority comes from him, whether they look good in the eyes of men or not. They have to give an account. So pray for your leaders, because giving such an account is not an easy thing to do. Pray that they are covered in the blood of Christ, that they are forgiven, so that they do not end up having to give that account. Because if they have to give that account, there's a bit of Revelation 20 here. If they have to give that account, if they're judged by their books, by what they've done, they're doomed. So pray that they hear the word of the Lord and that they have faith, trust in Christ's promise. It mentions the judgments that are written will fall upon Babylon. That's verse 13, everything written in this book. That would be chapters 50 and 51, so we're a couple weeks away from that yet. Chapter 46 through 51 are judgment against the nations, the various nations, and 50 and 51 zoom in on Babylon. They're judged according to their deeds and the works of their hands. When I read verse 16, so Jeremiah is told to give them the cup of the wine of God's wrath. That's a bit of a revelational phrase itself. If you read through the book of Revelation, they will stagger, they will drink and stagger and be crazed because of the sword I'm sending among them. That feels like the world that I see around me today. That the governments of this world, the leadership of this world, drunk, staggering, crazed. I mean, they don't listen to the Lord. They don't hear his word. They do whatever they please, and they seem to be in a race with one another to outdo one another's evil works. And the people that follow them, this is, again, Revelation language. Revelation 13 will depict governments in this world as the first beast that Satan enlists in his battle against the church to kill Christians. The people that worship the beast, the people that enslave themselves to government, who trust in their governments instead of in God, Old Testament and the Psalms warn against that. Psalm 146, verse 3, "Put not your trust in princes and a son of man in whom there is no salvation." And yet we do. The people of this world so frequently do. Governments are perishing. We are not to cling to them. We are to cling to Christ alone. We honor our governing officials and do what we can to serve them because the Lord has given them to us. So there's a balance with governments, and that's a helpful thing for your children to be able to learn. It's a helpful thing for all of us as Christians to be able to learn. Now, verses 17 through 26 are just going to list off all these kings that the Lord is judging. So you have not just Jerusalem, which would be Zedekiah. You now have Pharaoh, king of Egypt, which is off to the southwest. Most people know where Egypt is at. The kings of the land of Uz. Uz is a descendant of Nahor, brother of Abraham, and so is Buz, who's mentioned down in verse 23. The Philistine kings, they have 5 kings in a lot of their history over Ashkelon, Gaza, Ekron, Ashdod, and Gath. At this point, Gath is not mentioned, and Ashdod is a remnant. So Philistia seems to have already begun its demise. King David has a part to play in that. He was warring against them often. Edom is to the south of Judah. It is the descendants of Jacob's brother Esau. Moab is off to the southeast, on the eastern side of the Salt Sea, or the Dead Sea today. Ammon is to the east of that as well. Ammon is just to the north of Moab on the eastern side of the Jordan River there. The kings of Tyre and Sidon both are port cities on the Mediterranean Sea off to the northwest of Jerusalem. All the kings of the coastland across the sea. So that whole Mediterranean Sea, all the different kingdoms are targeted with that one phrase. Dedan is either a descendant of Cush or Abraham from the book of Genesis. They both had sons by that name. Tema is a descendant of Ishmael from Genesis chapter 25. All cut the corners of their hair as a reference to the hairstyle of some of the men that lived off to the southeast in what we would call Arabia today, which gets mentioned then in verse 24, the Arabian kings, the kings of Zimri, the kings of Elam. Elam would be a son of Shem. Zimri is a little harder to find in Scripture, who that might be a descendant of. Media is off to the east. Really, it's to the northeast of Babylon itself. Elam is east of Babylon. These kings got mentioned in the book of Genesis as well. And then after all of these, one after another, the king of Babylon also shall drink as greatest of all. It's not just time that lays waste to kingdoms, or one nation getting angry with another. God is in control. God is judge, and he brings these nations to their knees in his rightful judgment because of sin. So they drink the cup of God's wrath. If they refuse it, he forces them to drink it. Right? You cannot avoid God's judgment, even if you try. The only way to avoid God's judgment is his Son, Jesus Christ, who takes the judgment for you. So by his forgiveness, we have life. Otherwise, we would also have the same end, the same outcome. You shall not go unpunished. If he will not spare his own people because they have sinned, why would he spare the other nations? He's going to bring his sword against all the inhabitants of the earth. Romans chapter 3, verse 23, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Be a fitting context there. So Jeremiah is to then speak to all these kings, which he said in verse 17 that he did, that he took the cup to all these nations. Here's the word he is to speak. It really compares the Lord to a lion, which is what Amos often does, the prophet, one of the minor prophets, that this lion has come out. He's come out from his lair, and he is destroying these places. They will make a racket, they will make clamor, but judgment will come to the ends of the earth. Shepherds, in the latter part here, is a reference probably to leadership. That is, sheep are led by a shepherd, so the people of this earth are led by their kings. So this is likely a reference to kings, although you could probably see it as a both and, that there won't even be refuge for the shepherds. So shepherds who would seek shelter from a storm or something like that. From God's wrath, there is nowhere to hide. So the Lord's judgment will fall upon all. The fierce anger of Yahweh, like a lion, he has left his lair. So again, apart from Christ, there is no salvation. That is what is seen in a text like this.